fourth-year drama student here at Queen's University. Welcome to my presentation on autobiographical solo performance in theater. So, throughout the semester, I have been researching the autobiographical solo show format in order to figure out how it functions and explore my own thoughts on the genre. Now, before we go any further, I want to be clear as to what I mean by autobiographical solo performance. I'm going to be specifically talking about solo shows that are done by performers who are talking about their own life. So that's what I'm doing here specifically. However, I may draw on sources that only fit the autobiographical aspect or the solo aspect. Anytime I do so, then I will try to bring it in and give context to autobiographical solo performance. So, as John mentioned, there's questions in the programs, and if you could just be aware of those while we're doing it. My kind supervisor, John Lazarus, who introduced me here today. On a similar note, I would like to thank everyone who has helped me with this project. That includes Dr. Jen Stevenson, Professor Adair Reddish. I've never actually said his last name, so I hope I pronounced that correctly. And Ben Thomas, who was my consultant throughout this process. When I was trying to compose this lecture, I had the same thought of when I was starting to do the project as a whole. Basically, where do I start? Because there's so much to talk about, and I think I would like to start with the autobiographical aspect because that's the part that I struggle with the most. I also struggle with PowerPoint, so okay. Actually, I'm just gonna run off my notes for now. To begin, let's have a definition of autobiography. So, autobiography is someone writing about their own life. So that's simple enough. As soon as we okay, no one ever leaves the room because they had it, but that's fine. So we're going to start with autobiography. And then move on to the solo aspect. So, autobiography. The first thing I want to pose is, if I wrote something that is autobiographical and someone else read it, would it still be autobiographical? Similarly, it's passing through someone else, so then would it be biographical? If I asked someone in the audience today here to read the opening of my lecture, so hello, I'm Chris Johnson, a fourth-year drama student here at Queen's University, would that still be autobiographical? I would argue no. As soon as someone else performs an autobiographical script, it goes into some sort of mix between autobiography and biography. This is referred to as some by auto/biographical material. The slash means and or. Here, I will give you a short autobiography of myself. So I'm Chris Johnson, and I was born in 1996 in Oshawa. However, I grew up a town over in Whitby. My parents are John and Kate Johnson, who my dad was a mechanic on buses throughout his career, and then my mom actually did bus route planning for elementary schools. This is kind of weird because for the past 3 summers as a university student, I was a bus driver. So I guess that kind of runs in the family. In Whitby, I went to high school, and I fell in love with theater there, and that brought me here, which kind of catches you up on me. So, the word autobiography is usually used to describe a book that has been written by an author about their own life. Then there is also something called an autobiographical novel, which is a situation where the text is fictive, but the audience has some sort of reason to suspect that what is being written by the author is actually about their own life. See, it kind of gets complicated. Philippe Lejeune, a French essayist and professor, is one person who understood how, this would have been on PowerPoint, but that's fine. So Lejeune understood how complicated the subject of autobiography is. So he wrote an essay called The Autobiographical Pact. And in this essay he begins with, is it possible to define autobiography? I kind of found this comforting because it meant I was not the only one who struggled with that question. The Autobiographical Pact was Lejeune trying to put into words an agreement between the author, the character and narrator, so that's the same person, and the audience or reader. So he's trying to put agreement between all of those people that what is being told to you is true. And so the autobiographical pact is just that, a pact with the audience that what is being told is the autobiographical truth of the person writing it. Now, Lejeune was specifically talking about the autobiographical prose form, so a book. He actually takes the time to talk about different types of autobiography because they have different degrees of truth. And he perceives true autobiography as something that has no degrees of truth. It has no fiction. This is the point in the presentation where I marked down to tell you that I'm going to speed up, so I should be aware of that and slow down. If I don't say that out loud, I won't slow down, so that's why that's in there. I actually think it kind of comes from me being the youngest in my family, and not just the youngest as in like, I have an older brother. I'm the youngest of 10 cousins. So whenever we would get into a big family gathering, I would have to speak very quickly to get my point in because otherwise no one would listen to me. So if I didn't speak at that speed, no one heard me. So bear with me. Back to our previously scheduled programming. Theater, however, is a completely different medium than books. In books, there are a limited amount of people involved in the creation process. So usually the main parties involved with the autobiographical book are the author, who is also the subject and narrator, and the reader. Usually you'll also have an editor, but that's about it. But theater is a collaborative art form. So if you're creating theater in a traditional form, then you add a director, you add a producer, you add a stage manager, you add many technical positions, you add a ton of designers, and many, many more. The list could go on and on. Cheryl Grace, a professor at UBC, actually talks about this in one of her essays. It was called the Autobiographical Pact, Performing the Autobiographical Pact Towards a Theory of Identity and Performance. And she said that you would need at least 5 co-signatures to have a pact for theater because there's so many people involved. This is instead of the tripartite that Lejeune was talking about between the narrator, the author, and the reader. Personally, I think this kind of complicates things too much. I think we can just use the autobiographical pact as a term to describe the performer author talking to the audience, everything that is being told is true. I think it's simple as that. While the whole concept of autobiography is telling your truth, there is an immediate problem in theater because theater always has a fictive aspect. The person on stage has usually done the show multiple times, at least when you consider rehearsal. The narrative is put into a way that creates a fulfilling story, and many theatrical aspects are added to make the truth more significant in a well-constructed experience for the audience. Susan Bennett, a professor at UC Calgary, also found that problem. So she discusses this in her essay, 3DAB. She even begins with a quote from Paul John Eakin, an American professor specializing in autobiography. The self that is at the center of all autobiographical narrative is necessarily a fictive one. No, okay. My mom's favorite phrase is, everything happens for a reason. I hate this phrase. The reason I hate the phrase, everything happens for a reason, is because so many random things happen all the time that you have no control over, and also whenever you're being told that, that usually means there's something wrong going on. It means there's something bad that's happened, and they're like, no, everything happens for a reason. It just drives me nuts. So like an example would be, okay, I didn't get into the post-secondary school that I wanted to. Okay, I guess we're getting into that. I didn't get into, I wanted to go to Sheridan College for musical theater performance. I actually didn't get into that school twice. I auditioned in grade 12, and I auditioned in my first year here at Queen's. But if I didn't stay at Queen's or go to Queen's at all, I would have missed so many opportunities, so many experiences, and so many people that I know that I consider close friends. So it turned out to be a good thing that I didn't get into Sheridan. And by doing that, I have proved my mother's point. Everything happens for a reason, because we give it a reason. So basically, that's the idea of autobiographical narratives having fictive structures. You're putting fictive structures into your life all the time. So while the idea that there are always fictive narrative structures is true for all autobiography, I think it's especially true for theater. I think that the suspension for disbelief is interesting in terms of talking about autobiographical solo performance relating to a fictive structure. The performer is asking you to drop some of your suspension of disbelief through the autobiographical pact, but the show is still a fictive structure, and you have to be aware of that as an audience member. It's a fine line that this genre walks. The conclusion that I've come to about whether the fiction inherent in autobiographical solo performance genre is taken too far is whether everything that is said by the author-performer is true, and if it's true within the fiction that they have created. So the show can be fiction, but anything that the life that is drawn upon for its content cannot be. Okay, this is where I would have used my PowerPoint. Okay, here. So the whole point of my PowerPoint was that we would just add more and more aspects, and then I would build upon them. We're going to use a bench. So this bench, this is autobiography. We're going to be building upon this bench. This is actually kind of apt. I made this bench for a show a year ago. So I am literally building upon my own truth. That's deep. Okay, now we're on to the more self-explanatory aspect of autobiographical solo performance. So that would be having one person on stage. So having one person on stage, rather than a cast or a large cast or even a two-person cast, changes shows because there's only one person to focus on. This is even more exaggerated when the only focus on stage is also the subject of the show. The most common way that solo show performers communicate to the audience is by talking directly to them. Oftentimes there's no explanation for this, but sometimes there are conceits to use this, conceits to explain this. Possible examples are talking to a family member, giving a lecture, or recording a message. One person who has interesting concepts for his solo character speaking alone on stage is Jordan Tannehill. Now, we should all be familiar with Jordan Tannehill here at Queen's because there was just a production done by the drama department of his play, Concord Floor. So in one of his plays, Rihanna Boy 95, he has the performer speaking directly into a webcam, and it's in like a YouTube confessional style, and that's how the solo show is done. And in another one of his plays, Peter Fetchter 59 Minutes, he has sound design fill in for the other characters who, other than Peter, who is alone on stage. Thinking about solo shows, when thinking about solo shows, it's important to understand that one body does not mean one character. Even in an autobiographical work, other characters can come into the mix with the performer embodying them in the story. So this can be as simple as quoting a person, or as big as taking on body language, way of speaking, and movement. So I always say that I can do an impression of my dad without any words. And the impression is just this. So my dad hates that impression because it makes him look constipated. But I think it illustrates something where, like, even just like bending in, just having your arms like this, like I would never have, and like making that face, it's just so illustrative of a different character, and immediately the audience gets that, at least if it's done well. Yeah, so a fun idea to think about when only one person is on stage is that height is relative. Because there's no one to compare heights with. Because there's no one to compare heights with, the audience has the ability to project whatever height they want onto the performer. I became aware of this when I saw the Fish Eyes trilogy by Anita Majumdar. So Anita Majumdar is a graduate of the National Theatre School here in Canada from the acting program. And I met her after the show. And on stage, she seemed bigger than life, but after the show, I actually didn't recognize her because she was shorter than me. I just assumed she was taller. Perhaps I only find this interesting because I am a relatively short man myself. So I'm about 5'5", which I don't think is like overly short. I mean, like if you think about it, Bruno Mars, Daniel Radcliffe, Elijah Wood, these are just people around my height, and that's just off the top of my head. So I think that just proves my point. Okay, where was I? Shorter. Oh, one-person shows tend to be shorter than most full-length plays. I believe this is because of exhaustion. Exhaustion for both the performer and the audience. The performer is putting so much energy out into the theater because they are the driving force of the performance. They set the tone, they set the pace, and they set the way that their story is told into the world. The audience can get exhausted during solo shows as well because of the amount of focus they have to put on one person. Sometimes that focus plays into the narrative on very high-stakes shows. Other times the focus can create tension on the audience, but this can be often disarmed by comedic relief. Comedy is an important part of solo shows because it wins over the audience. And having the audience on your side when you're the only person on stage is really important in keeping the audience invested. That's not to say that you can't have unlikable characters in solo shows, but as a general rule, comedy can really help you in that footing. So I have another note to tell me to slow down. Thanks, Chris. Solo shows also create a strange type of performance that I like to call a conversation. When there's only one person on stage, the performer is usually talking directly to the audience. This makes it feel very personal because it's almost like a one-on-one relationship because you're making eye contact, there's just one person speaking, and it gets into that flow of a conversation. An autobiographical solo performer who excelled in making his work seem like a conversation is Spalding Gray. So Spalding Gray was a person who, at the end of the 20th century, actually made most of his living by telling his own story in what he called monologues. So what Spalding Gray would do before every show is, or for every show, is that he would set himself behind a desk, sit casually, have his papers out, and then he would speak in a very casual way. And that just created this conversational feel. And this conversational feel is also something that helps with investment, going back to comedy. Okay, so now we have to build upon the bench. Okay, so we need to add the solo aspect. Solo. So this is where we have two parts of our genre interacting in a very specific way. Like any genre, autobiographical shows come in many shapes and sizes. That was something that I actually had to come to terms with my research. Where do I draw the lines with what can be considered an autobiographical one-person show, and what shouldn't count? The first category of shows I will talk about is what I consider a traditional autobiographical one-person show. This is the type of show where the author-performer is talking to the audience, either without an explanation or with some sort of device of talking to a relative, friend, other person, and basically they just go fully into their life story. These are usually billed as a solo play, and it's meant for a specifically theater audience. One of these types of traditional shows that I've encountered live is Single Joy by Karina Malich from the Storefront Fringe Festival in the summer here in Kingston. And the show featured Karina coming to terms with being happy with being single. She chose to acknowledge the audience and recreated her Sabbath dinner on stage. So she has Sabbath dinner with her family every Saturday night, and she just decked out the stage the same way. And this kind of gave her an in for talking about her family, which I thought was very smart. But one thing that I kind of feel bad about is that, so the Storefront Fringe Festival had these like spaces that were like 50 seats maybe around there, and I walked in there and it was right after I got my proposal accepted, and I was like, yeah, cool, I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna take notes. So it's 45 seats and I'm sitting in the back and she can plainly see me taking notes. It's kind of awkward because I could see her making eye contact with me and she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm trying to pay attention and take notes. And that didn't really come across. So that's something that I will not be doing in the near future. Okay, Sorry, John. I'm just gonna try something. If I was to do my own autobiographical solo show, it would be about bus driving. So I mentioned that before. I'm a bus driver, and it would be okay. So it would be about me being on a bus, and yeah, just about my life. So it would be. Hi. Yeah. Cool. No, you can stand there. You're just a little bit behind the line, please. When did I get this job? Oh, no, I got it last summer. Yeah, so it's a student job, which is kind of nice. So I did this for a few weeks in the summer, and then I go back to school, and I can come back the next summer. It's kind of nice, actually. Yeah, no, it pays really well. That's the reason I do it. Yeah, no, it's going well. But that's not to say that there aren't hard parts of the job. I mean, the worst part are the hours, because you have to do split shifts, and these split shifts include getting up at 5:45 in the morning and then being done at 9 a.m. and then having to come back 8 hours later, which is kind of frustrating. You don't have much of a sleep schedule, but other than that, it's not too bad. Oh, and people. Yeah, those are a problem with the job too. You deal with a lot of people who, no matter what you say or what has happened, they will blame you for being late. So there could be a sea of traffic. There could be 20 cars in front of me, and the person's, why are you 5 minutes late? And it doesn't matter what you say. Your bus could break down. Really doesn't matter. Also, some people are just generally angry. The first time I actually did the bus route by myself, I walked onto a busy route, got my bus all set up. The first woman walked on and went, "Fuck you!" And I went, and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to say because, well, okay, she was old. She was like an 80-year-old woman walking on the bus who didn't pay and said, "Fuck you," so I was like, I'll let that one slide. Yeah. Have a good day. So, yeah, that would be a solo show. So, this is just like a traditional type of show where you're taking the person on the ride with you. Now at this point in the presentation, some of you may be thinking, well, I've never seen an autobiographical solo show. Why are you telling me this? Why did I come here? So this might actually pique your interest, which the topic is stand-up comedy. Stand-up often features one person on stage talking about their life. Sound familiar? Cool. So stand-up comedy features many of the same characteristics of autobiographical solo shows. I've watched many stand-up comedies that actually bridge very nicely into autobiographical solo shows, like Mike Birbiglia. He was actually one of the people that I got interested in, and that's how I got to this project. Another type of performance that bridges into autobiographical solo shows are solo act concerts. I mean, think about it. Usually the solo act will be talking about their life in context of songs and songwriting. It shares a lot of similar concepts and performance stylings of autobiographical solo shows. So, are stand-up comedy shows and solo act concerts autobiographical solo shows? Well, like most things, context is key. If the show is autobiographical, solo, and has a core story or point, then I would say yes. If it's just someone talking about their life willy-dilly and they don't really have a point, then I would say no. So when I was starting this project, I proposed it to John, and John said, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. And I said that I want to have this type of presentation at the end, and I said that maybe I could involve examples of my own life to give concepts. And he said to me, do you think you've had an interesting life? What? I mean, like, it's a hard question. It's daunting. I mean, like, what's the criteria for an interesting life? Do you have to have like life-threatening things happening to you all the time? Does it have to be like all doom and gloom? Like, I just didn't know where that was coming from, so it scared me. In the summer before I began my project, I went down to Toronto to see a show by Tracy Aaron Smith. So, Tracy Aaron Smith, Tracy Aaron Smith is the founder and runs Solo Theatre in Toronto. And Solo is spelled S-O-U-L-O. Kind of clever. She specializes in not only doing her own solo shows, but in helping other people tell their stories through autobiographical solo storytelling. So the show that I saw by Tracy Aaron Smith was called The Story You Tell About Your Life Becomes Your Life. The show was Smith exploring how she puts together her own solo shows, how she teaches others to tell their own stories through theater, and going through her past solo shows by recreating them, and why all of this was important. I have to be honest, seeing that show got me slightly nervous because I was attempting to do a similar project in the fall. But I decided that her show was so personal that my own exploration of the autobiographical solo performance genre would be different enough to have merit put against her own. Smith brought up many interesting points throughout her show. She stands by the principle that everyone has a story to tell. That kind of put my worry down from what John said. One concept that the story about you tell about your life becomes your life had was present tensing stories. So that means that any story you tell should be in the present tense so the audience can come along for the ride with you. So rather than saying, I was walking down the street last month, you'd be like, I'm walking down the street. It's very simple, but actually really effective. When I was doing my busing, it would be active. I would be driving the bus. It wouldn't be like, remember that time I was driving a bus? Crazy. Yeah, it's not like something like that. The way that Smith explained the autobiographical solo show genre is like cooking a fish. So, if the show is not well constructed, going back to the fictive elements of theater, then you are hitting the audience in the face with a fish. The fish represents your story. So if it's digestible for the audience, then they'll take it in. If it's not, you're just wow. So she furthers this by saying that there are two types of solo performers: givers and takers. You want to give the audience something rather than just taking their attention for no reason. Okay, I think we've added enough concepts that we should start building upon this. So, what do we have? We have the fictive elements of autobiographical solo storytelling. We have, so this would be the concepts you're using in your show, so how you're speaking to the audience. And this one would be everything else. Okay, so I think we are at the point where we should start wrapping everything up. So we have all of these elements, and I've told you a bunch about different solo shows, autobiographical shows, but why is this important? Why is this important in 2017 context? Why here, why now, if we're going to be doing DRAM 100 lecture style? So, okay. So, throughout this presentation, okay, sorry folks. Okay, my last couple pages seemed to screw up when I was printing, so I'm just going to pull it up. So, okay. Okay, sorry, I just got an email. Okay, I couldn't find the other page. Okay, my credit isn't with that. I don't have the page. Derek told me to put the room back. Okay, you know, when I was starting this project, I really wanted I really wanted to study it. I mean, I really wanted to study autobiographical solo performance. I thought it was a really cool way of telling your own story. But to be honest, this project has given me a lot of anxiety. I just was wondering whether I'm the right person to be talking about this. I mean, I'm 21. I feel weird talking about any subject like I am an expert, especially when there are experts in our department like Jen Stevenson, who have been working for years on the same topic, and I come in with a presentation that I've done for a semester being like, hey, I solved it. I just don't think it's accurate. I think it's kind of stupid, not to mention the fact that I am a very average student. I'm not a good writer. I'm actually a pretty poor writer. I still make stupid grammatical mistakes, and I'm not sure why I would want to do a project like this. I look at all of my friends who are doing so much more than me. They're doing like 5 shows, they have a full course load, and they're doing the same TA job as me, and they're thriving, and I can't even finish my project. It's just like a little disheartening, and you look at all of your friends who know where they're going, and they seem to have picked up enough skills for the future, and then you look at yourself and you don't know exactly what you've done. Again, I can't even finish a dumb project. But maybe that's the point. Maybe that's why autobiographical solo performance is actually a genre that has a lot of merit. I mean, you get to present yourself in a way that's more honest than sometimes you can even be honest with your friends or family. It's a way that you're presenting it to people in your own terms, with people listening rather than wanting to just give advice. And I mean, I know it's cliche to say, but if you look at how our lives are constructed through social media, you only see the good sides. And it's really, really easy to feel like you're alone in your own struggle. But usually solo shows are about someone's struggle. If you don't have conflict, then there's no reason in having a story. So maybe that's why the autobiographical solo show format has merit. Everything happens for a reason. Thank you.